Claire smirked, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "You'll never find someone like me," she laughed, a perfect mix of arrogance and amusement dancing in her voice. She always knew exactly how to leave an impression, how to make sure her words lingered long after she walked away. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just let her go. She was waiting for something, a reaction, a sign that she had wounded me, that her absence would leave a hole too deep to fill. That was how Claire operated. She wanted to be unforgettable, to be the storm no one could move on from. But what she never considered, what never even crossed her mind, was that I might choose to be the one who disappeared first. As she walked away, heels clicking against the pavement, I stood there, motionless. Not because I was broken, not because I was stunned, but because I was already making a decision. I wasn't going to chase her. I wasn't going to fight for something that had never truly been mine. I was simply going to vanish. Claire had spent years teaching me what it felt like to wait, to sit in uncertainty, to wonder if I mattered, to question if I was enough. She had turned my patience into her playground, knowing I'd always be there, waiting at the edge of her world. But not anymore. I watched her figure disappear into the night, a final performance in a play I no longer had any interest in. Then, without a word, I turned and walked the other way. And just like that, I was gone. The silent departure, the first thing I did, was erase every trace of myself from her world. I didn't post sad quotes. I didn't drown my sorrows in late-night messages or drunken regrets. I simply ceased to exist in the space she had grown accustomed to finding me in. No status updates, no carefully curated photos meant to make her wonder, no breadcrumbs for her to follow. I became a ghost, but not the kind that haunts, the kind that is simply absent. At first, she probably didn't notice. Claire had never been the type to reflect, to question, to second-guess. She had always assumed she was the sun and that I, like everyone else, would orbit her indefinitely. And maybe once I had. But people like Claire only understand value when something is gone. She had expected the usual heartbreak. She had expected me to try and prove my worth, to remind her why she should stay, to let her dangle the possibility of return over my head like a cruel game of maybe someday. Instead, I moved forward as if she had never been there at all. And that was the moment the real story began. For a while, Claire was too busy enjoying her newfound freedom to notice my absence. She reveled in the thrill of her so-called independence, filling her days with excitement, distractions, and the temporary high of being unattached. Nights spent at crowded bars where strangers admired her, weekends lost in fleeting adventures that held no real depth. She lived as if she had won some invisible battle. In her mind, I was likely somewhere suffering, drowning in regret, waiting for the moment when I would finally cave and reach out. She probably imagined me scrolling through old pictures, reminiscing, drafting messages I'd never send. Claire always thought of love as a game with a clear winner and loser, and she had no doubt she had come out on top. But the truth was, I wasn't watching, I wasn't longing. I had left her world so cleanly, so thoroughly that there wasn't even a shadow of me lingering in the background. She had expected a storm, a mess, the predictable aftermath of a heart she thought she had broken. Instead, there was only silence. And silence is a strange thing. It can be comforting when you expect it, but when it arrives uninvited, it unsettles. At first she dismissed it. Maybe I was just being proud, letting my wounds heal before inevitably resurfacing. She assumed I'd eventually send a late-night text, something subtle but desperate enough to show I still cared. She convinced herself that she still had power over me even in absence. But then the weeks stretched into months, and my name never appeared on her screen. She casually checked my profile one night, expecting some sign of me. An update, a sad quote, a picture with mutual friends that could give her a glimpse into my state of mind. Nothing. My digital presence was as empty as if I had never existed. Claire wasn't used to uncertainty. She wasn't used to being the one left wondering. For the first time in her life, she realized she had no idea what I was doing. The first message. It was small at first, almost effortless. "Hey, hope you're doing well." Simple, casual, as if we were nothing more than old acquaintances crossing paths again. I saw the message, read it in an instant, but I didn't respond. I let it sit there, untouched, a ghost of a conversation that would never begin. I could almost picture her reaction, the slight frown, the way she would tilt her head in mild confusion. She wasn't worried yet. Not truly. It was just the first attempt, the kind of message people sent when they wanted to test the waters. Days passed. Then another message came. "It's been a while. I was just thinking about you." A little more effort, a little less indifference. Still, I didn't reply. I imagined her frustration, the way she would stare at her phone, trying to convince herself that she didn't care. She would justify my silence, make excuses for me in her head. Maybe I was busy. Maybe I hadn't seen it. Maybe I was just taking time. But deep down, a small seed of doubt had been planted. The growing realization: silence is powerful when wielded correctly. It doesn't just leave questions. It forces people to sit in them. Claire, for all her confidence, had never been forced to feel what I had once felt. The endless waiting, the uncertainty, the slow unraveling of control. Her messages became more frequent. I miss talking to you. Do you ever think about us? Logan, can we just talk? Still, I read them but never answered. I never let her know if they even mattered. That was when she started reaching out to mutual friends. At first, she kept it subtle, asking about me in passing, pretending it was nothing more than curiosity. Have you seen Logan lately? He's been so quiet. Is he okay? They told her the truth, that I was doing fine, that I was moving on, that somehow I had managed to erase her from my world so completely that even they weren't sure what to say. That was when the panic set in, because for the first time, Claire realized she wasn't in control of the narrative. She wasn't the one leaving anymore. She was the one being left behind. The unraveling, her texts became longer, more emotional. I was stupid to leave. I don't know why you won't talk to me. Can we just meet for coffee? I need to see you, Logan, please. But she wasn't getting an answer. She wasn't used to waiting. She wasn't used to feeling forgotten. And yet, here she was, staring at a screen, waiting for something that would never come. The shift in power. Revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes the coldest, quietest form of it is the most satisfying. I didn't need to ruin Claire. I didn't need to make her feel small or broken. All I had to do was let her feel my absence. Because for the first time in her life, she had to sit in the space she once forced me into. And it was there in that quiet, lonely waiting game that she finally understood I was never coming back. At first, Claire told herself it was just pride. Mine, not hers. She convinced herself that I was playing hard to get, that my silence was nothing more than a stubborn attempt at making her regret walking away. She believed, for a while, that I was still out there, waiting in the wings, that I just needed a little more time before I came back like I always did. But time is a funny thing. It has a way of turning assumptions into uncertainty. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Every unanswered message, every ignored call, every moment of silence chipped away at the confidence she had once worn like armor. I wasn't reacting the way she had expected. I wasn't reaching out. I wasn't even leaving breadcrumbs for her to follow. I had simply disappeared. The realization didn't come all at once. It started small. An unease she couldn't quite name, a frustration she refused to acknowledge. She would stare at her phone, scrolling through old messages, rereading conversations that once held weight, searching for something, anything, that could explain what was happening. Then came the questions she never thought she'd ask. Did he ever really love me? Was I wrong about him? What if I was never as irreplaceable as I believed? Doubt began to settle in, heavy and unshakable. Claire had spent so much time believing she was the center of every room she walked into, but now, for the first time, she felt invisible. The cracks began to show. She started reaching out more frequently. The once occasional messages became a steady stream of attempts, each one more desperate than the last. Logan, I just want to talk. Can we please meet, just once? I don't understand why you're doing this. Still, I gave her nothing. That's when she turned to social media. Claire had always been someone who lived for validation, who thrived on being seen. Her posts had always been curated to perfection, flawless pictures, clever captions, a highlight reel of the life she wanted people to believe she was living. But now there was a shift. The carefully filtered photos started to seem forced. The captions, once playful and detached, became more reflective, tinged with something that almost resembled regret. She started posting about missing old friends, about people who disappear without explanation, about how we never truly appreciate what we have until it's gone. She wasn't saying my name, but she didn't have to. The search for closure. She began showing up at places where she thought she might run into me. Cafes we used to visit, mutual friends, gatherings, places that had once been part of our routine. She wasn't looking for reconciliation, not yet. She was looking for proof. Proof that I was still out there. Proof that I hadn't moved on. But she found nothing, and that was worse than any rejection I could have given her. Because closure isn't about getting an answer, It's about knowing the answer is still out there, waiting for you to find it. But in my case there was no answer, just an absence so complete it left her questioning if she had ever truly known me at all. Claire had always been the one in control. She decided when things ended, how they ended, and whether there was room for a second chance. She was used to men orbiting around her, waiting for her to acknowledge them, to grant them even the smallest bit of attention. It fed her. It made her feel powerful. But this? This was something she had never encountered before. No matter how many times she reached out, she was met with nothing but silence. No explanations, no bitterness, no carefully worded messages designed to make her feel guilty. Just nothing. She didn't know how to process that. At first, she convinced herself that I was just being stubborn, that eventually I would break, and when I did, she'd be ready. She imagined it clearly. Me caving, finally responding, pouring out all the emotions I had supposedly been bottling up. She would sigh, maybe apologize, offer a carefully crafted line about not knowing what she had until it was gone. It would be dramatic, meaningful, and most importantly, on her terms. But as time dragged on, a different fear took root. What if I wasn't waiting? What if I had already moved on? What if, this time, she was the one who had been left behind? The fear of being forgotten. Claire never thought she would be in this position, checking her phone obsessively, rereading conversations from months ago, analyzing old photos as if they held some hidden clue she had overlooked. She started wondering about things she had never cared to think about before. Where was I now? Who was I with? Was I laughing with someone new the way I used to laugh with her? Had someone else taken my hand, sat across from me at a restaurant, leaned in close, the way she once had? The idea of being replaced gnawed at her. Not because she had ever truly appreciated me, but because she had always assumed she was irreplaceable. She had lived her life believing that no matter where she went, no matter who she left, she would always have the option of returning. And now for the first time that door was closed. Lock, gone. The last attempt. One night, after too many glasses of wine, Claire did something she swore she never would. She typed out a message, one she knew would expose just how much she had been affected. There was no pretending this time, no casual, "Hey, how have you been?" No feigned indifference. This time it was real. "I made a mistake." She hesitated before sending it, staring at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment everything would turn around. She was sure of it. She hit send, and then she waited, and waited, and waited. But just like every message before it, it sat there, unanswered. Read, ignore. That was the moment Claire finally understood. She wasn't waiting for me. She was waiting for someone who no longer existed. Claire stared at her phone, eyes locked on the screen, waiting for something that would never come. The message sat there, cold and unanswered, the words, "I made a mistake," feeling smaller and more meaningless with each passing second. She refreshed the chat as if that would somehow change the reality in front of her. Maybe there was a glitch. Maybe the message hadn't really been delivered. Maybe, just maybe, I hadn't seen it yet. But then, the tiny notification sealed her fate. Seen at 9:42 p.m. No reply, no reaction, just silence. It was over. For the first time in her life, Claire truly understood what it meant to be discarded. The weight of regret. She had always assumed she had time. Time to explore, to push boundaries, to test limits. Time to leave and return when she was ready. Time to make mistakes and then fix them. But time had run out. The silence wasn't just a refusal to engage. It was a statement. It was proof that she no longer held any power, that the strings she had once pulled so effortlessly had been cut. She had been so sure that I would wait for her. She had convinced herself that I would always be there, lingering in the background, quietly longing, forever willing to entertain the idea of what if. But what she had never considered, what had never even crossed her mind, was that I might have found peace without her. Claire had spent so long believing she was unforgettable, but now she realized the truth. She wasn't missed. She wasn't irreplaceable. She was nothing more than a name in my past, Logan's Freedom. On the other side of the city, I put my phone down, smirking slightly before slipping it into my pocket. The message had come exactly as I had expected, but there was no satisfaction in reading it, because the truth was, I didn't care anymore. Claire had once occupied every corner of my mind, but now she was nothing more than a shadow. The weight of her absence had lifted long ago, and in its place there was only lightness. Freedom. I had built a new life, one where I didn't have to measure my worth against someone else's validation. My world no longer revolved around the push and pull of her affections, the endless cycle of proving, waiting, hoping. I was happy, And not in a performative way, not in the way people pretend to be when they want to make an ex jealous. I was truly, deeply content. And the thought of her no longer stirred anything inside me. Not anger, not sadness, not longing, just nothing. And that was the greatest victory of all. Claire's new reality. Claire tossed her phone onto the table, leaning back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as the weight of everything settled over her. This was what it felt like to be forgotten, to send messages that went unanswered, to wait for someone who had already moved on, to exist in someone's past without the option of returning. For the first time, she felt the full weight of what she had done. Not just leaving me, but assuming she could come back whenever she pleased. Assuming she was worth coming back for, but she wasn't. And now she was the one left with the regret. The final scene. Logan stood up, stretching, breathing in the crisp night air. His phone was silent now, but it didn't matter. There was nothing left to wait for. He had already walked away, and this time he wasn't looking back.